The clinking of champagne glasses is a sound I've always associated with beginnings. Christening a new ship, breaking ground on a new building. But that evening, under the chandeliers of the Oak Valley Country Club, it was a death knell. It was the sound of my son's spirit being chipped away in front of 200 people who were supposed to be celebrating his new life. His father-in-law, Frederick Vance, stood at the podium with a sharkskin smile, and he wasn't welcoming a new member into the family. He was drawing a line between his world of wealth and our world of what he thought was nothing. He had no idea he was standing in a building I owned, in a city I'd rebuilt, and that his entire fragile empire was propped up by the man he was mocking. By the end of that night, Frederick Vance would know exactly who I was, and he would never look at either of us the same way again. If stories like this one, where quiet dignity finally gets its due, are the kind of thing that keeps you company on a long drive or a quiet evening, stick around. Hit subscribe. It helps more than you'd think, and I've got a lot more of these to tell you. Frederick tapped the microphone, a self-satisfied chuckle rumbling in his chest, and we are just so thrilled to welcome Leo into our family, he boomed. It's not every day you get to lift someone up. Give them a real leg up in the world. We know they're starting with very little, a humble beginning, as they say. But with our help, with the Vance family's guidance, I'm sure he'll make something of himself eventually. The room offered a little polite, uncomfortable applause. My son's face was a pale, humiliated mask. I felt a cold, quiet rage building inside me, a pressure rising like concrete in a mold. At my son's wedding, his father-in-law was calling us poor. He spent 10 agonizing minutes humiliating the one thing I cherished most in this world, and he had no clue that the very ground he was standing on was built by the man he was mocking. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and entitlement. Frederick's wife, draped in silk, watched her husband with a proud smirk. Their friends, local business owners, chuckled along, a little too loudly, a little too eager to prove they were in on the joke. They were all part of the same club, and my son and I were clearly not members. I took a slow sip of water. It was the only thing I could control. I looked over at Leo. He has his mother's kind eyes and my stubborn jaw. He caught my gaze from across the room, a desperate, silent apology in his expression. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Stay calm. Endure. It was a lesson I taught him young. You don't get into a shouting match with a storm. You build a shelter. You reinforce your foundations, and you wait for it to pass. Frederick was just getting warmed up. He loved the sound of his own voice, especially when he was the hero of the story. You know, he continued, leaning into the microphone, when my Sarah first told us about Leo, we were concerned naturally. He's a good kid, don't get me wrong. Works with his hands, honest work. He said honest work like it was a quaint, pitiful hobby, like building ships in a bottle. But Sarah has certain standards, a lifestyle she's accustomed to. We just wanted to make sure she'd be taken care of, that she wouldn't have to struggle. My knuckles were white. works with his hands. Leo was a master carpenter, an artist who could turn a block of raw timber into something beautiful and lasting. He'd built a name on pure quality and craftsmanship, not on schmoozing at country clubs. He was proud of his work, and this puffed-up peacock was dismissing it as noble poverty. Then came the insult that mattered most. Frederick cleared his throat, adopting a tone of profound generosity. And so, as a wedding gift to help these two get on their feet, I've decided to make Leo an offer. A position at my firm, Vance Financial Solutions. A junior accountant. A real chance to learn how the world actually works, to trade in the tool belt for a tie, and finally start building a real future. Murmurs rippled through the room. It was audacious. It was a public declaration that my son's life and work up to this point were worthless, an act of charity designed not to help, but to humiliate. I saw Leo's jaw clench so hard I nearly heard it from my table. He was about to stand. I could see it. His pride, the very core of him I'd so carefully nurtured, had been poked one too many times. I just looked at him and shook my head again, more firmly this time. Not yet. Not like this. My anger was a cold, clean fire. It didn't rage. It focused. It waited. And it knew exactly where the breaking point was. To understand why I sat there and took it, you have to understand the promise I made 25 years ago. You have to understand Elena, my wife. Her memory isn't a ghost. It's an anchor. The bedrock my life is built on. When we met, I had nothing but a beat-up pickup, some second-hand tools, and a belief that I could build things better than anyone else. She was a librarian who saw the world in stories. She fell in love with me, not despite my calloused hands, but because of them. She said they were proof I was a man who knew how to create, not just acquire. We built a life in a small, two-bedroom house on the north side of town. I started my company, Summit Ridge Construction, right out of our garage. In the early days, it was just me and a couple of guys, pouring foundations and framing houses. I'd come home covered in dust, and Elena would be there with a smile, a hot meal, and this unwavering belief in me. When Leo was born, he became our whole world. But just as Summit Ridge was starting to land bigger contracts, just as money was flowing in, like we'd never imagined, the doctors found the shadow on her lung. The next 2 years were a blur of hospitals, treatments, and a desperate race against time. In her final weeks, in a quiet hospital room overlooking the city, she made me promise. Her voice was a whisper, but her words were steel. Tom, this money, it's going to be a flood. Don't let it drown him. Raise him to be a good man, not a rich man. Teach him the value of a hard day's work. Let him find a love like ours, a love that isn't about a price tag. She squeezed my hand. Promise me you'll give him a normal life. Promise you won't let the money become a wall around his heart. I promised. And after she was gone, that promise became my blueprint. I kept the small house. I kept driving my old truck. I invested every dollar back into the company, buying land, acquiring smaller firms, bidding on city projects. Summit Ridge grew into a silent behemoth. We built the new wing on the hospital where Elena spent her last days. We laid the foundations for the university's engineering school. We were the invisible architects of the city's growth, the ones doing the essential work that men in suits like Frederick Vance would later take credit for at cocktail parties. I never told Leo the full extent of it. He knew I owned a construction company and that we were comfortable. He didn't need to know comfortable meant I was one of the wealthiest people in the state. He grew up mowing lawns for pocket money, working summers on my job sites to learn the value of sweat, and found his own passion in carpentry. He became exactly the man Elena would have wanted: kind, humble, hard-working, and utterly unimpressed by wealth. He found Sarah, a sweet girl who seemed to love him for who he was. I thought my promise was fulfilled. I'd built my son's character on solid ground. I just hadn't accounted for the father-in-law. The humiliations didn't start at the wedding. It was a slow drip that began the moment they got engaged. Frederick Vance sizes people up in dollars and cents, and from his first glance, he'd found me and my son wanting. I remember the suit shopping trip. Frederick's idea. He took us to a ridiculously expensive shop, the kind where suits are kept in glass cases like museum pieces. I walked in wearing jeans, a button-down, work boots. "Tom, you have to look the part," he said. "We can't have you showing up looking like you're here to fix the plumbing." He pulled out a flashy pinstripe suit. "This is a good starter suit. Let me help you out. Consider it a gift." I just smiled. "Thanks, Frederick, but I've already got one picked out." I walked over to a simple navy suit, understated, timeless, the kind of suit a man wears, not the kind that wears him. The sales associate came over. He looked at my boots, then my face, and a flicker of recognition crossed his features. He'd seen me on the news a few months back at the groundbreaking for the children's hospital. He said nothing about it, but his demeanor shifted. "An excellent choice, sir. The craftsmanship is superb." He'd ignored Frederick entirely. Frederick's face soured. He couldn't understand why the staff deferred to me instead of his platinum card. Then there was the battle over the venue. Sarah and Leo wanted something small. Frederick insisted on the Oak Valley Country Club. The Vance family has a reputation to uphold. He made a show of discussing costs, glancing at us with pity. "Don't you worry about the bill. I'll handle it." He didn't know I was a founding member of that club. I'd financed its construction a decade ago. The next day, I had my office make an anonymous donation to the club's event fund, more than covering the entire wedding, and had the manager call Leo and Sarah to tell them they'd been chosen for a promotional package. A lie. A quiet fix. Temporary. The rehearsal dinner was worse. Frederick held court, telling stories of his financial prowess. He turned to me. "So, Tom, what's the biggest deal you've ever closed? A new deck for a dentist's office?" His friends roared. I just smiled. "Something like that," I said quietly. I thought about the Westgate Tower, a 50-story building I'd wrestled away from 3 national firms. I thought about the billion-dollar transit contract that would define the city's next 50 years. But I said nothing. I honored my promise to Elena. I would not let my wealth be a weapon. I let him have his petty victory. I just didn't realize he'd try to turn that victory into a public execution. Back in the ballroom, Frederick was reaching his grand finale. He presented the junior accountant job like a king knighting a peasant. This is a real opportunity, Leo, a chance to get your foot in the door of the real world, to build a career you can be proud of, to provide for my daughter the way she deserves. The implication hung in the air. What you're doing now isn't a real career. You are not enough. Sarah looked mortified. She was tugging her father's sleeve, whispering his name, but he was lost in his own magnanimity. He mistook the stunned silence for admiration. This was the moment Leo broke. I saw it. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly on the floor. He was going to speak to defend his honor, and as much as my soul roared for him to do it, I knew it would be a mistake. It would mar his wedding day, and hand Frederick the satisfaction of getting under his skin. Gently, but with the unyielding pressure of a man who has braced 1,000-ton steel beams, I placed my hand on his forearm. Our eyes met. His were blazing. Mine were calm, cold, and promised a different kind of justice. "Wait," my eyes said. "The foundation is about to crack. Let it." Leo hesitated, trembling with frustration. He looked from me to Sarah, who was now staring at her father with fury. Slowly, he sat back down. He yielded the moment to me, and at that exact moment, as if the universe had been waiting for its cue, it delivered the punchline. The large oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A man in a simple suit stepped inside, no tie, looking like he'd come from a long day of important work. I saw Frederick's eyes light up. This was his guest of honor, the man he'd been bragging about for weeks, Marcus Thorne, director of the City Planning Commission. To a man like Frederick, having him show up was the ultimate status symbol. Frederick cut his speech short. "Well, that's all from me. Let's hear it for the happy couple." Then he practically jogged over to intercept Thorne. "Marcus, you made it. I'm so honored." Marcus gave Frederick a polite, dismissive nod, extricated his arm. "Hello, Frederick. Just wanted to stop by." His eyes scanned the room, and then they landed on me, at table 19. Next to the kitchen, a genuine smile broke across Marcus's face. He completely bypassed the sputtering Frederick and began walking a direct line across the ballroom past the mayor, past the bank presidents, past everyone Frederick considered important, straight to my table. The room went quiet. Guests watched, confused, as this powerful city official strode with purpose toward the man they'd just been told was a charity case. "Tom." His voice was full of pleasure. He shook my hand firmly. "Didn't expect to see you here. I got your message you were taking the weekend off, but I thought you'd be at the Northgate site. We have that final zoning vote on Tuesday." I stood. "Marcus, Good to see you. Couldn't miss my son's wedding. You know Leo." Marcus turned to my son, clapping him on the shoulder. "Of course. The carpenter. Congratulations, son. Your father is one of the finest, most honest men I've ever worked with." He turned, gaze sweeping to Frederick, who had followed like a lost puppy. A look of confusion crossed his face. "Frederick, you must be thrilled to have your daughter marry into the Stone family. Quite the coup. You do realize who this is, don't you? You're now related to the man who is single-handedly funding and building the entire downtown revitalization project." Silence, a profound, echoing, absolute silence. Every eye in the room locked on me. Frederick's face drained of color red to white to a sickly gray. The shark-skinned smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed gape of disbelief. He looked at me, then at Marcus, then back at me. His brain was furiously trying to connect the dots. Tom, the manual laborer. Tom, the man in the cheap suit. Tom Stone. Thomas Stone, the reclusive owner of Summit Ridge Construction. The man who moved billions in steel and concrete with a quiet phone call. The man whose name was on the permit for the very country club they were standing in. The man he'd just spent 10 minutes humiliating. That man was me. In the deafening silence, you could practically hear 200 people recalculating my net worth. The whispers started. "That's Thomas Stone? Summit Ridge, oh my God." The looks of pity morphed into awe, shock, deep embarrassment. Frederick looked like he'd been hit. His mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. His entire worldview, a careful hierarchy with himself at the top, had just been demolished. Leo stared at me. His face was a canvas of shock, confusion, and a flicker of betrayal, but underneath it all, a brilliant wave of understanding. All the weirdness, the downplaying, the anonymous gifts, it all crashed into place. He wasn't looking at me with anger. He was looking at me with a newfound respect, as if seeing his old dad for the first time. Sarah was the first to move. She walked to her father, voice low but cutting. "Dad, what have you done?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned to me, eyes filled with tears of shame. "Mr. Stone, I am so sorry." "It's Thomas," I said calmly. "And you have nothing to be sorry for, Sarah." Finally, Frederick found his voice a pathetic rasp. Tom, Mr. Stone, I had no idea. It was all just a joke. A wedding toast I was just trying to..." He trailed off. We all knew what he was trying to do. I looked at Frederick Vance. Not with anger or triumph, with cold assessment, the way I'd look at a compromised beam in a building. The man was structurally unsound. I didn't raise my voice. The quietest words are often the heaviest. "My son has always been my greatest project, Frederick," I said, my voice resonating in the still room. "I spent 25 years making sure his foundation was built on character, not cash, on integrity, not image. I was worried about the quality of the materials he was marrying into. It seems my concerns were justified. The finality in my tone was absolute. It wasn't an insult. It was a judgment. I turned from him, dismissing him completely, and faced my son and new daughter-in-law. I put a hand on each of their shoulders. Leo, Sarah, your life together is all that matters. Let's not let this structural issue ruin your day. I looked at my son, and for the first time that night, he gave me a real smile, relief, and love. Then I added, "But we'll be leaving after the cake is cut." The message was clear. The celebration could continue. But my association with Frederick was over. For the sake of the children, I'd be civil. But the door to my life, my trust, and my respect was now closed and locked. Access denied. We stayed for the cake. I was cordial to the guests who now flocked to me, the same ones who'd ignored me an hour before. I shook the hands they offered. I let them have their moment of discovering me. But I kept my promise to Elena that night, same as I had for 25 years. Wealth was never going to be the thing that defined my son, or me. Character was. And for one night, in a room full of people who measured worth in dollars, that was the only thing that mattered. Frederick Vance never got his apology accepted, because I never asked him to give one. Some doors don't need slamming. They just need to stay quietly, permanently shut. If this story meant something to you, if you know what it's like to be underestimated and to win with dignity instead of noise, stay with me. There's more where this came from, and I'd love for you to be here for the next one. Leo still works with his hands. He still builds things that last. And now, so does his marriage on a foundation his father-in-law never saw coming and never truly understood. That was always the point.